Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views and News, and I'm Faisal Rahman from our Islamabad studios. Today, we'll be talking about the 42nd anniversary of the Iranian Revolution. 1979 was the year when a lot of changes were taking place in this particular region. The government of Shah Iran, who was called Shah Muhammad Raza Pahlavi, was overthrown by the leftists, by the students, as well as some secular forces were also involved in that, and eventually resulting in the establishment of the government of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. An interesting part was that this had its impact on the entire region, whether you talk about Afghanistan or you talk about Pakistan. The government of General Muhammad Ziaul Haq after Bhutto Sahab was in place over here, and when we talk about Afghanistan, that was also under the invasion of USSR at that time. So a lot of changes were taking place. But eventually, since the revolution in Iran was huge, people were out, and if you just look at those visuals, you will be surprised to see what was going on. The change took place, and the Islamic Republic of Iran came into being in a way that it had a lot of support from the Islamists, and resulting in today's Iran. In fact, our production team, they prepared a very interesting report, and that is about the revolution of that time. Let's watch that out, and after that, I'll introduce you to our panelists.
The vast land of Iran is known as the cradle of ancient civilization, the glorious history, authentic Iranian Islamic culture, and the possession of sage scholars and scientists, which over the years has presented the world with many valuable and unique experiences and achievements in science, culture, politics, economy, art, and social matters. This immense geographical area with diverse climates and rich fossil and mineral reserves has been a vital intersection for exportation and economy, enjoyed a strategic regional position, and provided security, stability, and tranquility for this role-playing zone. The progressive and dynamic spirit of Iran and Iranians continues to peak and shines like a diamond in the fields of modern knowledge, superior technologies, flourishing industries, media, energy exports, tourism, ideology, and the promotion of military and security advancements. Health sector development. Iran's stance in the region and international ties. Agriculture sector development. Achievements in sports. Development of tourism industry. Expansion of infrastructure. and social development.
Now we'll be showing you a message given by the Iranian ambassador stationed in Pakistan, Ambassador His Excellency Muhammad Ali Husseini.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. मेरे अजीज़ पाकिस्तानी बहनें और भाइयों, अस्सलाम अलैकुम. पाकिस्तानी अजीम शुहदा को खराज तहसीन पेश करता हूँ. As Ambassador of the Islamic Republic of Iran, I am honored to congratulate 42nd anniversaries for auspicious victory of the Iran's 1979 Islamic Revolution to all of its lovers from Pakistan and around the world. Thanks to the grace and blessings of God Almighty and endeavors of the valiant and resilient people of Iran, the tree of revolution is today more robust than any time before, and the Islamic Republic of Iran is witnessing exemplary, self-reliant growth and development. A development that is based on the might of its women and men in all the fields from science to technology. The Iranian people are firmly following the Islamic Revolution ideals founded by its main theorist, Imam Khomeini, and every year delightedly celebrate the anniversary of their country's liberation from tyranny. Obviously, such a revolution with its just and right-seeking approach wasn't cherished by supremacist and oppressive powers. So they exploited any opportunity to blemish this revolution and afflict intellectual and political currents that are interested in it. Imposition of harsh sanctions and maximum pressure against our Islamic Republic, especially in its high point level of COVID-19 crisis, unilateral pressure on neighboring countries to divert relation from its normal course, withdrawing or not fulfilling provisions of JCPOA, which symbolizes the belief and will of the Islamic Republic of Iran to resolve international challenges with peaceful manners, and assassination of Iranian intellectuals are just some examples of these hostile approaches to the Islamic Revolution and sample of their attempts to undermine it. Today, after 4 decades of the Islamic Revolution, we are witnessing that the people of Iran, especially Iranian youth, with a serious determination to progress and firm belief to the values of Islamic principles, strive for the betterment and prosperity of their country and stand against unilateralism. This determination have created a bright and hopeful horizon for our dear Iran. At the end, I emphasize that the Islamic Republic of Iran has extended the hand of peace and friendship to all free and right-seeking nations in the region and beyond, and calls for the realization of true human dignity-related values. The Islamic Republic of Iran is encouraging materialization of this ideal and pursuing common interests in the region and the world. After the Islamic Revolution in Iran, the value and importance of the friendly and brotherly neighboring country of Pakistan increased more than ever, and the promotion of relations becomes of the priorities in the foreign policy of the Islamic Republic of Iran. May friendship between Iran and Pakistan lasts forever.
Now, let me introduce you to our panelists. We have with us in our studio, on my right, is Dr. Qandil Abbas Saab. Qandil Abbas Saab is an expert on foreign affairs. Thank you so much, Dr. Saab, for your presence. And we have with us from Iran on Skype, Mustafa Khosrisham Saab. He is an Iran affairs analyst and a senior journalist. Thank you so much, sir, for your time as well.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure to have you. Now, Dr. Qandil, first of all, sir, today we are talking about the 42nd anniversary of the Iranian Revolution. And I still remember as a child in 1979 when things changed and people were talking about an Islamic setup in Iran, in our neighbor. What were the reasons? What, in fact, led to this kind of a revolution? Because we have also learned that this was, in fact, not something which started in 1979. You could see its traces in 1977, and in 1978, the resistance started. Is it true, sir?
Exactly. Actually, the active process of revolution was started in 1964 when Imam Khomeini was exiled from Iran to Iraq and then Turkey and then to France. The main reason behind this revolution is westernization of Shah in Iran on the one hand, and secondly his secularist policies in very traditional and religious society of Iran. So these were two the main reasons behind this revolution. But academically, if we want to define revolution in the whole world history, I think there are only 3 revolutions as per academic definition. First revolution was French Revolution, then Russian Revolution, and then this is in modern history, this is third revolution, because if we define revolution, that is 100% and complete change along with bloodshed. So that is Iranian Revolution, and in present history, I think this is the only unprecedented
revolution. Change
revolution.
of the social fabric, correct, sir?
Exactly, not only social fabric, political fabric, economic fabric, religious fabric, all the things were changed.
Okay.
Yes, because if we are compromising on reforms, that is not revolution, that is change of reforms. But this is revolutionary change, because at that time, in fact, Raza Shah asked from religious leadership, especially Imam Khomeini, what you want? You want post of president, you want post of prime minister, you want post of any other. He said, we need all these posts and designations, but excluding king, but excluding Shah. Because previously in constitutional revolution, there was a mistake, in fact, by religious leadership. They compromised on the presence of monarch and king, and they asked for establishment of parliament. He established that parliament during constitutional revolution, but later on he demolished all those changes demanded by religious leadership. But at this time, religious leadership was very sharp and clear about their objectives, and they asked that we need all these changes, but excluding king.
But sir, what led to the rise of these religious elements?
In fact,
because you know, Iran was always considered a country which was either called mini Europe or a country which was very modern, very westernized, as you just mentioned.
Of course.
But what led to it? Were people not happy with it, or was there some other reason?
Actually, economic conditions were very bad, because Shah of Iran was importing Western technology, Westernization, Western culture. But that technology was not indigenous technology, and that resulted to poverty, especially in remote areas, not in big cities. In some big cities, there were signs of modernization and westernization, but in remote areas, there were certain backwardness and poverty. That resulted to involvement of those people in the movement of revolution, and especially there are 3 main factors which resulted to this active movement. First important thing was ideology and interpretation of that ideology in terms of revolution, Islamic ideology, I mean.
All right.
Secondly, leadership is very important, and for any revolution we need charismatic leadership, and that was available for Iranian revolution, that is in the shape of Imam Khomeini, and he played his role as a serious charismatic leader. And third thing was public mobilization, and two main factors, I mean the charismatic leadership and ideology resulted to mobilization of general public to come into the process of revolution, and they refused to obey the curfew imposed by Raza Shah, the martial law imposed by Raza Shah, and that has ultimately resulted to revolution in
So
Iran.
primarily the forces with Raza Shah Pahlavi versus the public was the issue again.
Yes, in fact, Raza Shah ordered them to shoot and kill to general public, but ultimately the forces, those who were
refused.
ordered, they refused Raza Shah and they joined the public's hand.
So at the end of the day,
Yes.
they won.
The whole system was changed.
But eventually, I mean, let me ask this question to a friend in Iran, Mustafa Khushishn Saab. Mustafa Saab, since you live there and you must have seen that revolution, you must have seen the change that took place. Now, when we talk about the Islamic State of Iran, or Islamic Republic of Iran for that matter, it seems that the government is of hardliners. I mean, this is the general perception portrayed by the Western media or the Western world, because at the end of the day, whether we like it or we don't like it, the Western world, they in fact always come up with new narratives. Now let's talk about that. So tell us about the change which Iran went through, and when we talk about 2020 or 2021, where exactly is Iran standing?
Hello again, and thanks for having me, and thanks for covering Islamic Revolution and developments in my country. Although Islamic Revolution is not limited to just Iran, as you just rightly mentioned, it's a source of inspiration for all people, liberty-seeking, freedom-seeking people throughout the world. Well, people of Iran wanted a change, a fundamental change, when Pahlavi regime was ruling the country 42 years ago. And people wanted independence, freedom, and also the right to exercise their sovereignty. This is the most important thing, which you could see in mottos chanted by the people, in slogans in the streets. I was a kid. I was 9 years old when the revolution happened, and I was part of it. I was in the demonstrations, sometimes with my dad, sometimes without him, with other people in the neighborhood. And we had confrontation with the Pahlavi regime soldiers who shot and killed so many people in our neighborhood. So the main point that Iranians wanted was independence. This independence was earned by every means after the revolution, and it has been the incentive, the driving force for progress as well as resistance of the Iranians in the face of the United States and the Western powers. They have been pressuring Tehran in order to subdue Tehran, to overthrow the Islamic establishment, and they have failed because of this independence seeking that has been nurturing progress and resistance. Sometimes I see friends coming from Far East Asia talking to me about some Arab oil-rich Arab nations and comparing them with Iran. When I asked them which one would you like to be, the first time they answered Iran, I was surprised somehow, because I told them that we've been under pressure so much. Why do you want to be Iran? They said, all throughout the last 4 decades, you've been under sanctions, you've been under much pressure, but you've made so much progress in various areas of nanotechnology, stem cell technology, cancer treatment, cancer therapy, as well as diagnosis, other fields and areas of medicine, as well as nuclear technology, missile technology. You've grown clout and influence throughout the region, and you've become a role model. And this hardship will end one day when you defeat this enmity of the West towards the Islamic Republic. But you have earned a lot, including your satellite and aerospace technology that could push you as a pioneering state in the Muslim world. So Iranians have been making progress despite all the pressures. They've been under strike by the United States and its Western allies, who are trying to, misrepresent the Islamic Republic. All throughout the past 4 decades, Iranians have been out in the streets. Sometimes they are complaining about their living conditions. They do protests, gathering. That's what they demanded for. Actually, they revolted for this very purpose, to be free to express their views, ideas, and to protest about what they don't like. And sometimes teachers, sometimes retired people, clerks, they are out, they complain in front of the parliament. So they have earned their right of freedom and protest. And all of the various ideas and views, political views, are present in the Islamic Republic. That's why elections are, people, the turnout is so high in Iran in elections because people believe in the right of sovereignty. So I do believe that in the first 40 years, Iran has resisted pretty well against the United States animosity. It has earned much progress in various areas. Now, the Iranian leader last year started a move for architecture of the next 40 years, and he called Iranian intellectuals and especially the youth to start building the roadmap for the next 40 years. And this is very important because Iran is going to, the Iranian intellectuals, academics, and thinkers, they are working to present a role model or a roadmap for Islamic civilization, an Iranian Islamic role model and roadmap towards progress. So if you just take a look at where Iran was 20 years ago, just 20 years ago in this region, in West Asia or the Middle East, as they call it in the West, now take a look at where Iran is right now, as Iran has gathered lots of influence over the region, and it has inspired so many popular movements to stand against Israel and the United States. Now you may imagine where Iran would be in the next 20 years. That's what I've been telling diplomats from South Korea who met me a few times. I've been telling them that if you do not go for modifying and coordinating or harmonizing your relations with the Islamic Republic, and if you want to pursue the United States path towards Iran, you would be harmed, especially your economy, because it's not just Iran that you're living, but it's the whole region where Iran is the dominant force, not in military terms, but the Iranian Islamic ideology that has been admired by so many nations in this region.
All right, I'll just get back to you on that, Mustafa Saab. We have also been joined in by Professor Dr. Lubna Abid Ali. She's the Dean, FCS, National Defense University. Ma'am, thank you so much for taking out your time and talking to PTV World. Now, since we are talking about the Iranian Revolution, the change that occurred in our neighborhood, let's talk about that, ma'am. I'm sure you must have taught about it, you must have read about it, you must have seen it yourself. Let's start off from there, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, Faisal Rahman, for inviting me to the PTV World, and in the context of celebrating the success story of the Iranian 42nd year of the Iranian Revolution. My understanding of Iran is based on the post-imperialist, post-Cold Warist perception of international relations, which is based in the Foucauldian context of the underlying assumptions of constructivism based that highlight the role of ideology, the role of discourse, civilization, role of perception, and role of history. In the context of Iranian, the change that Iran has brought within the domestic politics as well as in the foreign policy behavior of Iran, and that has revolutionized the outcomes of the political contestations, not only in the Gulf region, but in the whole of Middle East and beyond. The three cardinal principles of Iranian constitution, Islami Jamhuriye Iran, इक्तिसादी Khud Kifaye Iran, and the third is um, in, the continuity of the is Mustaqil Iran hai, Mustaqil, independence of Iran. These three principles, the Islami Jamhuriya Iran is based on the ideology. The ideology is that of the jurisdiction of the jurisconsult. By the virtue, ipso facto, by the virtue of this ideology of Vilayat-e-Faqih, the states and the Gulf sheikdoms that are on the west of the Persian Gulf, they are rendered illegitimate because of the hereditary politics over there. Secondly, as regards the Iqtisadiya Khudkafaiye Iran, Iran has proved to be resilient. With all sanctions that had been placed against Iran, beginning with the 1979 November takeover of the US embassy as the hostage that lasted for the 444 days and was
Correct.
the worst nightmare. That has resulted in the conflict between US and Iran. It changed the dynamics of Iran and US relations from the most trusted ally or the twin pillar policy of the United States of America from 1971, beginning with Nixon and Henry Kissinger and Nixon's strategy of the reliance on Saudi Arabia and Iran as the twin pillars of American foreign policy. In the Middle East, one pillar collapsed at the time of the revolution. And the revolution, it is pertinent to understand that this was an indigenous, it was an ideological revolution. It was the unique aspect of this revolution that it was carried out simultaneously by the masses, by the elites, by the forces, by the intellectuals, by the urban, and by the rural masses of Iran. The reports that emerged at the end of 1978 by the last ambassador in Iran, Ambassador Sullivan, and the British ambassador, and Gary Sick, who was on the Iran desk in America, the reports of the sacrifices given by the Iranian people demonstrate the success of the ideology over the tyranny, over the reign of atrocities that had been unleashed by the Shah of Iran against the Iranian people by his secret agency SAVAK, Sazman-e Amniyat wa Ittelat-e Kishwar. And it continued with the American attempt to release the hostages in 1982 by sending the helicopters which collided with each other. And after the Operation Desert Storm, the relations in the height of the Cold War, the relations between US and Soviet Union never broke down to the level that their embassies kept functioning. In the context of US-Iran relations, till date, they have no ambassadorial contacts. And it changed the context as well as the agenda of Iranian foreign policy, not only at the regional level, but at the global level.
At the global level.
Then
Ma'am, I'll
coming
get
to
back to
the-
you on that, but let's talk about the present, 2021. So you talk about Iran, the first thing which pops up in your mind is the Iranian nuclear plan that has again been, over ballooned by the Western world.
Yes.
And we talk about JCPOA, we talk about the previous government, there were so many sanctions. Iran is a country full of resources. You talk about gas, you talk about petroleum products, you talk about precious metals, you talk about so much more. And unfortunately, they've got so much to offer to the regional countries, but they cannot because of those sanctions. We, as a neighbor, look at the total population of Pakistan, but when we talk about the trade, the bilateral trade with Iran, it
Yes,
hardly exists. Now the point is, sir, since it's the Biden's regime now, things will change. This is what we all expect. A lot of sanctions would be lifted. Iranians would be able to sort of, do trade with the regional countries, not only with the regional, but also at a larger level. Where do you see Iran, sir, within the next 3-4 years? Because now we've also learned the Chinese are planning to, in fact, invest $400 billion during the next 20-25 years. Your take, sir.
Actually, soon after 1979, during last 4 decades, I think some of the Western countries and United States started to put Iran into the isolation. And during this whole period, Iran tried to survive. And during first 8 years, you can understand that Iran was put under imposed war by Saddam. And during more than 4 decades period, Iran remained under sanctions. Despite all these pressures, all these sanctions and all these attempts of isolating Iran, Iran tried to survive, not only survive, but on scientific level, on industrial level, on economic levels, Iran progressed a lot. And
Despite all those sanctions
all
which were
those
imposed,
things.
okay?
And on the other hand, those powers who were trying to isolate Iran, it's mean Iran should not be part of regional and international politics. And that has resulted negatively in regional security and stability, and on international level it had very negative effects. So during Obama administration, they reached to the conclusion that Iran must be part of mainstream international and regional politics, so that they signed JCPOA with Iran, despite the fact that Iran is claiming that its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes, and that is for only energy needs, agricultural needs and medical needs. But Iran was blamed that they are trying to use atomic program for military purposes, but Iran accepted all those conditions provided
They were
by.
blamed for enriching those centrifuges to a certain level.
Exactly,
yeah, which were
exactly.
not
But
allowed.
unfortunately, Trump administration again unilaterally withdrew from that deal, and that has once again resulted to destabilization in regional and international levels. But after Joe Biden administration, it is expected that it is a good opportunity to involve Iran into the deal, and especially for Middle East peace process, and Iran can play a very effective role. Especially you can see situation in Palestine, situation in Syria and Yemen. So without involving Iran, nobody can even expect that there will be a normalization. On the other hand, Iran is trying to play a positive role in different regions. But if international powers are not ready to involve Iran into the regional and mainstream international politics, I think that will be maximum failure
Because you know, when you
instead
look
of
at,
maximum
look
pressure.
at the politics of the Middle East, this is such a complicated subject. I mean, there are so many adversaries out there, and I mean, all those brotherly countries are, you know, not getting along really well. There are proxies going on. Then there is an element of Israel and so much more. So if you allow me a quick comment from Professor Dr. Lubna Abid Ali before I put a question to Mustafa Khushashim Saab. Ma'am, quick 1-minute comment regarding the current situation, because I think Mr. Jawad Zarif has done a brilliant job. I think he's one of the best foreign ministers and one of the best negotiators present at this moment. Ma'am, your take, quick comment.
Jawad Zarif and along with Iran is considered as the civilized polity in the conduct of diplomacy at the global level. And Iran is by far predominantly the most influential Gulf state with 516 miles of Gulf coastline and twice the size of the population combined all the Gulf states together. Iran stands today as one of the resilient and the emerging powers. With the changed global transformations that have taken place in the post-Cold War period, with the rise of China and the resurgence of Russia, Iran has got many options to take its strategies and its options in foreign policy and it has successfully done that. We see its growing interaction with China, with Russia, its interaction. Iran holds keys to many of the conflicts and issues that range from Iraq to Syria. And Iran is the only power that has got the courage to challenge the atrocities of the state of Israel
All
and
right.
call it an apartheid state.
All right, ma'am. I think that's a very brilliant point. Comment from you regarding the same, sir. 2021 and onwards, what do you see happening for Iran, and where do you see Iran, sir, say in another 5 years from now, if everything remains constant? Mustafa Saab.
Well, first of all, let's remember that the U.S. Has seen Iran as the major force standing against the United States' illegitimate interests in this region, and especially against Israel. So Iran is representing a role model in the heartland, energy heartland of the world. So the U.S. may not tolerate that. So until 2005, they came up with the idea that they may not enforce a regime change in Iran. So they went for the containment strategy that works in the framework of a carrot and stick policy. The carrot is making and building up Iran's trust that the U.S. is for a conflict resolution approach, while our experience throughout the past 2 decades shows that ever since 2001, we have had several agreements, the small ones and big ones, with the US and with European states. In all these cases, according to European and American officials, Iran has been compliant with all the terms of the agreements it has struck with the West, but the US has never complied with any of the terms of the agreement because they want to contain Iran's power. So their problem is not with Iran's nuclear technology. Their problem is with Iran, and they mean to slow down Iran's growth and progress, stop it, and if possible, roll it back in order to later weaken Iran and enforce a regime change. Therefore, they may not go for a conflict resolution approach, no matter it's a Biden or a Trump or an Obama administration, because in this containment strategy, the pillars are posing credible military threat in order to change the calculations of Iranian decision makers, though there is no action, of course, it's just a threat, a credible threat as far as they can, and also complicated, vast sanctions. They have worked out this system of sanctions in order to change Iranian decision makers' calculations because of rising costs. So this formula, there is a maximum efficiency period of 1.5 to 2 years. It ended last May. Now Iran is gathering up its leverages against the United States, while the Biden administration, especially after the last year events in the Persian Gulf, when Iran shut down a global hub, the Iranians took the British ship and never let it go until after a month after they allowed the Iranian ship to leave Gibraltar after unloading its oil cargo in Syria. And also, after the masterpiece of Iranian military that was the barrage of missile attack on the U.S. airbase at Ain al-Assad, which devastated and ruined the U.S. prestige as the world power. Now, the Biden administration has found itself with decreasing power of the components of this formula, the threat as well as the sanctions. Now, Iran is working on leverages in order to gather more and more power against the United States. So basically, for the next 1 or 2 years, or even 4 or 5 years, Iran has realized that the U.S. is not willing to remove the sanctions. So it's working very hard on developing relations with the neighboring states, Pakistan, China, Russia, the resistance from Iraq, Lebanon, Syria. Iran needs to work out a roadmap. That's why the Iranian Supreme Leader sent a message, very important one, to Mr. Putin of Russia, that was carried by the Iranian speaker. Also, that's why Iran's judiciary chief is in Iraq today. So the purpose of all these trips, as well as the 25-year-long cooperation with the Chinese, is all one thing: developing relations with the neighboring states, regional states, as well as the power in the Eastern world. That's
all right, sir.
The look to the East strategy that Iran is working
Well, in fact, unfortunately, Mustafa Saab, we're running out of time, but thank you very much for your comments. It was a pleasure having you, Dr. Lubna Abid Ali, and it was great to see you, Dr. Kandil. It was a pleasure having you in the show, Dr. Saab. Thank you so much for your presence. And now we have been joined in by Professor Mohammad Marandi. He is the professor and head of American Studies at the University of Tehran. Professor Mohammad Marandi, thank you so much for taking out your time and talking to PTV World.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, since earlier we were talking about the Iranian Revolution, and then we also talked about the present day scenario. So if I may put this question to you, sir, regarding today's, when we talk about this year, 2021, regarding the today's Iran, though there are a lot of sanctions on Iran, some, rather most, seem to be very illegitimate, but since there is a concern that Iran might end up developing a nuclear weapon and so on and so forth, but Iran says and has always claimed that whatever progress they've made, that is regarding the civilian side of it, and that would be used in the medical science or otherwise. Now, first of all, your take, sir, since Joe Biden has come and a lot of people believe that the JCPOA, or for that matter the P5+1 formula, could come back, and all the sanctions put by the American regime during the Trump's time, they could be lifted. Let's talk about that, sir. How hopeful are you, and do you believe that is going to be done? And if so, where do you see Iran in the next couple of years?
I'm skeptical that the United States will actually implement the nuclear deal because the United States has a history of dishonesty and deception, but also more importantly, the problem between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States is not about nuclear weapons. It's not about terrorism. This is just the surface. Otherwise, it's the United States and the Israelis that have nuclear weapons, and the terrorism that the Israeli regime and American allies that they carry out across the region and across the world is clear to everyone. The dirty war in Syria, the destruction of Afghanistan and Iraq and Yemen and Libya, the sanctions on Venezuela, and the support for the coup in Bolivia. This is a history that would be shameful for any country that exists on this planet. The problem, therefore, between Iran and the United States is Iran's independence. Iran is truly unique in the sense that it, through the revolution, became independent of the Western Bloc, but it did not join the Eastern Bloc. And it developed a unique foreign policy, which even today is unique, because as you know, Iran does not accept, for example, the legitimacy of apartheid in Palestine. Iran does not accept the legitimacy of Israel anywhere in Palestine, not just simply the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And Iran has paid an extraordinarily heavy price for that policy. No other country has paid the price that Iran has, but Iran sticks to its principles, and that is something that the United States cannot tolerate.
Now, Professor, another quick comment on the current situation, because when you see the Gulf states accepting the state of Israel, for that matter, whether you talk about UAE or you talk about, you go further west, when you talk about Morocco, for that matter, and a couple of other countries, and obviously Saudi Arabia is on board, that's for sure. What sort of a role do you see of Iran now coming up, sir?
Well, Iran will continue to support the Palestinian cause, just as Iran supported the cause of the resistance in apartheid South Africa. Iran's policy towards the Israeli regime is identical to its policy with regards to South Africa. In South Africa, Iran said as long as apartheid exists, Iran will not have any ties with the apartheid regime because it is morally illegitimate. And Iran's position with regards to Palestine is the same. Iran's position is not limited to the West Bank or the Gaza Strip. It is linked to the whole of Palestine. And despite the fact that Turkey, the Emirates, Egypt, and other countries have official ties with the Israeli regime, despite the fact that they trade, and despite the fact that they have tourists come and go and direct flights, that has absolutely no impact on Iran's position towards Palestine. Iran will continue to support the resistance. Iran will continue to militarily support the resistance, unlike any other country. And Iran believes that this is the only way forward, because at the end of the day, apartheid is a morally destructive and despicable way of life. And the Palestinian people are being displaced, they're being ethnically cleansed, and they are being subjugated by people who have immigrated from Europe and the United States. So Iran is determined to continue to support the Palestinian cause as it did in the past, and whether the Americans or the Europeans like that or not is irrelevant to the Iranians.
All right, Professor, we have a very principled stance on the Palestinian issue. We believe that till the time the people of Palestine, they are not properly taken care of, their rights are given, and obviously this illegitimate state of Israel should withdraw from certain areas as well. We have a very clear-cut stance. Whether the Gulf countries, they accept Israel or not, we will not. Simple as that. But sir, may I ask you, what is the take of Iran when it comes to another very important issue, and that is the issue of Kashmir, where again, poor Kashmiris are being subjected to torture on almost daily basis by the trigger-happy Indian forces. Your take on that, sir?
Well, two things. One is that Iran does not accept any partial withdrawal from Palestinian territories. The whole of Palestine, which goes far beyond the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, belongs to the Palestinian people. Of course, Jews and Christians and others have the right to live side by side with Muslims in Palestine, but the whole of Palestine is one and it cannot be divided. The same is true with regards to Kashmir. The Iranian position on Kashmir has always been consistent, and that is that the people of Kashmir have the right to determine their fate, and their subjugation is immoral, just as the same immorality is being witnessed in Palestine, or in Latin America for that matter. The same is being seen in Kashmir. And the hope is that ultimately a future government in India would recognize that the best solution for its own people and the best solution for peace and security and tranquility and trade and development is to recognize the rights of the people of Kashmir.
All right, Professor, thank you so much for your time, and good luck, and have a great day ahead. Thank you so much for talking to PTV World. It was a pleasure having you. And that's all we have for this hour. Inshallah, I'll see you again. Till then, you take good care. Khuda Hafiz.